everyone, I really hope you've been keeping well and that your hearts are in good, exciting, Christmassy places. It is now officially December and I'm not feeling Christmassy at all. I'm such a Scrooge, but I am wearing a winter jumper and I've set up my bedroom all Christmassy, as you can see behind me. So hopefully I'll be getting into the vibe soon. Today I've got a video for you, clearly. Last time I uploaded, I talked about some of the difficulties that we've been going through as a generation, as a world, as a people recently. And I talked about the fact that because of all those difficulties, I had been finding it really hard to read. And so I thought, what better than to make a video about some books that are a really good way to get you out of a reading rut and make you really excited about reading again. And I think that's the point of this channel. If I excite anyone to read, then I've done my job. Heck, if I excite myself to read even more, then I've done an even better job. So I have come up with 4 groups of books that I think might help you get back into the spirit of reading and remind you how very awesome it is. So here we go. Ways to get out of a reading rut. I think one of the best things to do is just go straight back to books you know that you love. It doesn't matter if you read them once before, 1,000 times before, as long as you know that they're going to make your little heart happy, then what better than to dive back into them just to give you the flavour of reading words on a page again. I think that there's no better than that. So the first recommendation, and this should come as a surprise to no one since my second video on this channel was basically a love letter to Harry Potter, is dig out your Harry Potter collection either on audiobook or on just normal printed word and go back to Hogwarts. I have not done a reread for a really long time. I've reread 4, 5, 6 and 7 a whole bunch, but I haven't for many years now gone back to number 1 and started again. And I think they're a really good thing to read, not only when you're in a reading rut, but also at this time of year, because there are so many amazing Hogwarts Christmas scenes. Did anyone else get really, really hungry when they read all the descriptions of the amazing banquets that took place over different holidays at Hogwarts? Oh, it's making me want to go back right now speaking about it. So yeah, the first thing I would say is just go back to a world like Hogwarts that you know is going to welcome you home with open arms. The second book I have to recommend you is one that I most certainly love and that I'm definitely due a reread for. It's gotten me out of ruts before, and it's called The Secret History by Donna Tartt. Now this is a slightly older book, so a lot of you may have read it already, but if you haven't, I urge you to. It's the story of 6 friends who are classic students in New England, so it's really atmospheric, some great descriptions of the place, and just really makes you want to be there. And essentially you start off with a flash forward where you get told that one of the 6 has been killed. So essentially you start off with something that you might have learnt later in the book. In that way, it's a really intricately crafted mystery, but instead of being a whodunit, it's more of a whydunit, where you want to figure out how this person ended up dying, what kind of effect it had on his friends, whether his friends were involved in any capacity, and sort of the mystery that underlies that whole situation. And I just think that it's the perfect world to dive into when you haven't read in a while. It's a bit of a chunker. It's about, I think, 500 pages if I remember correctly. Don't let that put you off, even if you're feeling a bit intimidated, just because the story will just carry you on its wings, and it's so suspenseful and so beautifully written, and you get to learn a bit about Latin and Greek along the way. The second thing I would say, if you're feeling just a bit discouraged about the whole reading thing, your attention span is low. That's something that happens to me. If I get out of the habit of reading, I feel like it's harder to focus on longer form stories. So I would recommend that you look for things that you can dip in and out of easily at your whim whenever you want to, and you can just sort of read in short bursts and still get a lot out of it. So the first thing I have to recommend you in this category is a short story collection I just finished reading called Children of the New World by Alexander Weinstein. It's a super new publication. In fact, I think it's only available in the States. If some of you are not in the States and you'd like me to send you a copy, then maybe we'll do a giveaway sometime soon. God knows I have way too many books and I would love to give it away to one of you. I think I heard it described this way on quite a few other people's channels, but I can think of no better way to describe it than Black Mirror in a short story collection. If you haven't seen Black Mirror on Netflix, you should absolutely be watching that. And if you have, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's kind of an exploration of how the future might go for our generation and the generations after us in terms of how we interact with technology and what the world might look like when technology starts taking over a little bit. How that might change our interpersonal relationships. You have a lot of exploration of falling in love with some kind of artificial intelligence instead of a human being. There's a great story where they have to pick one child that gets launched into space, and all the parents of the school children are there watching it, and it's just beautifully creepy and amazing. I don't read a lot of short story collections, and I read this in one go, and I actually think that I probably would have got much more out of it if I had read a story, put it down, gone and done something else, or even read another book and then read another story, dipped in and out of it, because that would just have given me time to sit with each story in its own right, as opposed to kind of having this big mishmash at the end of it. I do feel like it's a really great collection in that it does have a thread throughout that makes you think about some bigger questions surrounding technology in the future and personhood and humankind and all of these wonderful things. So I highly recommend that. It's Alexander Weinstein's debut collection. The second thing I have to recommend in this category might seem a little scary and a little more overwhelming at first, especially if you're not so much into poetry or anything like that, but it is the Unabridged journals of Sylvia Plath, which were published a few years ago. I should probably have looked that up before I started, but they were published a few years ago for the first time in their entirety in the US, and it was a massive literary event because these journals had been published previously in 1982, but they had been heavily edited by Ted Hughes. You'd think maybe to remove the things that put him in a bad light. They are everything that Sylvia Plath privately wrote in the last 12 years of her life. Now, it's very long. It's 1,000 pages. And the reason why I put it in this category is because it's so long, you can easily dip in and out of it, read one day here and there, 1 week here and there, and just dive into Sylvia Plath's thoughts and feelings. And I think if you've read any Sylvia Plath, and even if you haven't, most of us know what a beautiful, beautiful writer she was. And that's not just of her poetry, but also inside of her journals. And it's just so interesting because they start when she was still at Smith College, which is such a beautiful place, by the way. I've had the opportunity and luck to go there a few times because one of my best friends is a Smith alumnus. It's just wonderful to see what Plath went through from such a young age and kind of get a better image of her outside of the media that already exists about her. There's a lot of stuff out there, and mostly about her suicide and mostly about her depression and her mental health problems. And although you can see a lot of that in her private writings, clearly, because she was best friends with her journal, and what better place to write everything on her heart than in that journal. But I don't know, to me it humanized her. It made me more aware of what went into her writing process, and also of the lighter parts of her as a human being, which I think are very important to address and to see, especially in a person whose mental illness is well known. I think we are indebted to her, and we should absolutely give her space to show the lighter and more joyful aspects of her being. And so I think both on a psychological level and on a literary level, they're just absolutely beautiful journals, and they're just perfect to have as a kind of nightstand book. And whenever you're feeling up to it, you can pick it up and read it. I had it as the paperback version and it was super heavy, so that's the only thing that I would say. I still don't have a Kindle, but those of you who do, you might want to read it on Kindle because it's really heavy, and that sometimes put me off from picking it up. But yeah, highly recommend it as a kind of dippy book. Not a dippy egg, but a dippy book. Is that nerdy? Yeah, that's really nerdy. I really like dippy eggs. My cameraman is like dying behind the camera right now. Cool, you can cut. The third thing I think is so important when you're trying to learn to love reading again, even after a short time of, you know, maybe a bad reading month or just frustration with the books that you've recently read, or if you haven't really read, I think you just need a great story that's gonna take you off into a completely new world and maybe take you away from whatever you're experiencing in the present, and just something that you can then remember. It's like having existed in a past life, I guess, sometimes when you finish reading the book and you just have flashes of remembering what it was like to exist briefly in that world and in that story. And I think that really signifies a great book, and it's a really good way of, you know, starting to write the love letter again. Books with a great story. What would I recommend? The first one is a book that I've just finished called Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. I recently hauled this, well, relatively recently, in my September book haul. My life is just ridiculous. I'm always like, I'm gonna make book hauls every month, and then I haven't even been to a bookshop since I made that haul. Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. So this is a post-apocalyptic novel. It has no zombies in it, but it follows a Shakespeare troupe mostly, everyone who is associated with them, after this flu pandemic wipes out the entirety of the human race, mostly. It follows both the immediate aftermath of the end of the world, as well as kind of the long-term effects, both psychological and physical, of that end of the world, and what that means. How do we interact as humans when everything we know has left us? And how do the people who knew the world before, so to speak, interact with all the things they've lost versus the people who were maybe born when the world had already ended? It is absolutely beautiful, so well written, as funny as it is completely touching. I'm reading it with my husband and we both laughed out loud and also cried. It's a great road trip book. I read it to him as we were driving back from Arizona to LA the other day, and I was kind of his walking, talking human audiobook, and I think it worked really well. It's full of intertextuality with Shakespeare and a whole bunch of other books. You really don't need to get any of that to enjoy it. You don't necessarily even have to be a Shakespeare fan, but I just think it's absolutely beautiful. The story is so well crafted, so multi-layered, and it's just so poetic, and I can't wait to read more Emily St. John Mandel. I'm just really excited to be able to recommend this to anyone who hasn't read it already, because it was a 2014 release, but if you haven't picked it up, then I highly recommend, especially if you need just a good story to get your claws into. The other awesome story that I would recommend, I read a couple of years ago, and it's a great story, especially for book lovers, which why would you be watching this video unless you're a book lover? And so perfect to recommend when you're feeling a bit about books in general, because it will remind you why you love them so much. It's Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore by Robin Sloan. I absolutely love this book. I went in completely blind, had no idea what I was getting myself into, and it was just amazing. It's about a young guy who is employed in Silicon Valley, loses his job and ends up working in this bookstore. And it's a bit of a weird bookstore in that it's open 24 hours, set in San Francisco, obviously. And it turns out that this bookstore is not all that it seems. It's not a regular bookstore, and there are weird things going on, and bookshelves where there shouldn't be bookshelves, and strange books that don't seem quite like they should be there. And he slowly uncovers a whole bunch of secrets about both the bookstore and its strange owner, a small old man by the name of Mr. Penumbra, which is a great name. And it turns out that some of the secrets he unravels leads to a secret society that is more than 500 years old. So the novel kind of turns into this sort of pseudo mystery thing, and it's just awesome. I think it's a really interesting study of this sort of modern conflict that we're having between the printed word and technology, and whether technology is going to render the printed word obsolete at some point. And that's a really interesting thing, having it set in Silicon Valley, which is the heart of technology in a lot of ways, and yet having this bookstore at the center of it, which is full of dusty old books that are absolutely beautifully bound and that remind you that, you know, there's nothing like opening an old book and smelling the pages and letting the dust settle on your fingers. So yeah, I just really loved it, and I thought it was really funny. It sort of reminded me when I was, I don't know, 17, and I got this Tumblr, and I had this little widget that you could put into your Tumblr description, and it said, I pledge to read the printed word. Oh, it's so cringe. But I still don't have a Kindle, and I guess I do still pledge to read the printed word. I would not have it on any of my internet social media profiles at this point, but it does remind me of that. And so I would love you all, if you haven't already, to meet Mr. Penumbra and solve the mystery. And you get to go to Google HQ while you read, which isn't that cool, going to Google HQ without leaving your bed? Like, I think that's cool. Yeah, Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore. I would thrust it into the hands of any keen reader I could. Our last category for tonight, you guys, is books that are short or easy to read. Now, I feel like we were discussing earlier about short attention span and how that can be a bit discouraging when you're trying to read something and get into it. And I think the perfect antidote to that is something that you can just polish off really quickly, have the satisfaction of having finished a book and maybe being able to review it and just having loved it at the same time. So small but mighty books that pack in a punch. I have two recommendations for this category. One of them is a graphic novel, the first graphic novel I've recommended on this channel. And it's actually a French graphic novel by Maroh. Its French title is Le Bleu est une couleur chaude, also known as Blue is the warmest colour. Now, two things. You may have just noticed that I said those French words without an accent. You may also have noticed that my YouTube name is Bilingual Bookworm. Well, surprise for any of you who didn't know already, I am Paris born, and so French was my first language, I guess you could say, although my dad always spoke English to me. So there you go. I read this in French, but I can attest that the English translation is beautifully done. It's an amazing graphic novel. It is essentially the story of two girls and their relationship. One of the girls not being entirely sure about her sexuality, kind of exploring that situation in her heart and in herself, and falling in love with a wonderful girl with blue hair. Now, you may also have heard of it because it did get adapted into a French film of the same name in English, but in French it was called La Vie d'Adèle, which I think is a beautiful film. I once wrote a review. It has its problems, as all films do, and what is more fun than to critique media, especially through a feminist lens. There were two absolutely amazing actresses playing the lead roles, and it's really a film that has stayed with me. It won the Palme d'Or at Cannes and was very critically acclaimed, so I would recommend both. But the graphic novel is beautiful in art and in form, and it will stay with you, and the characters will stay with you, and it's just a really lovely thing to pick up, read quickly, but still have resting on your heart for a really long time. And you guys, that brings us to our last book of the night, which, this video might have gone quickly for once. I might not have had you sit with me for 26 minutes. How exciting! Who do I think I am always making these 26-minute videos? I remember the first video I made a couple months back. My dad called me afterwards and was like, "Darling, your video was very good, but it was very long. Do you not think?" Hopefully you guys enjoy sitting through them, and maybe this short one was a welcome break from my voice and my face. But the last book that I have to recommend falls not in the short books, but mostly in the easy to read books, and it's called One by Sarah Crossan, and it's actually young adult, I guess. Yeah, more young adult than middle grade, I would say. And it's a really interesting book, and it's unlike anything I've ever read before. Wait, my entire face is like super itchy right now. It's unlike any other book I've read before in the sense that it is in verse, which is not a format that we're used to when we're not reading a poetry book, but actually it's really welcome and really well done. It's about conjoined twins, which is particularly relevant to me, especially because I am a twin. Obviously not conjoined, but I have a fraternal twin. Shout out to Mel, love her a bunch. And so I'm really interested in the whole theory of twins and the minds that twins share and the lives that they share and the upbringings that they share and what that means for their hearts and for their souls, if you believe in souls, and just for how they are as people. I love anything to do with twins. So a book in verse about conjoined twins, yes please, pretty much written for me. Oh my god. It's a problem. Okay. It speaks about two characters, obviously, since they're conjoined twins. They're two girls, and we also get a really great look into two of their best friends that they make when they finally go to mainstream school. The book starts with them making the transition from being homeschooled to going to mainstream school. And then eventually a lot of things happen. I don't want to spoil it. Not only is the verse really beautifully written, not only somehow, even though sometimes there are only, I don't know, maybe a couple hundred words to a page, you fall in love with all the characters. They're all really well formed, and the story takes you from point A to point B in this really poetically beautiful way that you sometimes don't expect. And I would be really excited to give this to any YA reader as well as any adult reader, poetry reader or not. And it's super satisfying because at first it seems like a really big book. It's probably about, I don't know, 400 odd pages, but you get through it really quickly because of the way that it has this rhythmic pull to it that leads you from page to page. So it was really something, I think I read it in one night and it stayed with me, and I remember the characters, which, as you'll be realizing by now, is a big deal for me. If I'm still thinking about them a few months later, then it means that somewhere in my brain I made friends with them, and how exciting. What more do you want from a book than to make new friends? That is just the most romantic thing to me. So that's it for tonight, guys. I hope that that's given you some new books to think about and some recommendations that you might not have heard before, or it may remind you of something that you've been meaning to pick up for a while. I was so happy the other day I mentioned Life Animated by Ron Suskind, and someone commented saying that they had been meaning to pick it up a couple of months back and had forgotten about it, and my video had reminded them, and so maybe that person has read it now, and that just makes me so excited. I was really happy to read every single one of your comments last time on my video, especially on a video that was hard to make and touched on some really hard topics. It was really nice to know that I had spoken directly to a lot of people, that they felt supported in what they were feeling. So please say hi in the comments down below. Tell me if you've read any of these books, if you plan on reading any of them, if you have any advice about getting into a reading rut, and of course, as always, like the video, join the family by subscribing, and I will see you super soon. I think next time I might be coming to you from London, which is super exciting, and in the meantime, enjoy your December. Enjoy all the Vlogmas videos that are probably cluttering up your YouTube feeds. There is no better time to be on the internet than December. I love you all so much, and thank you so much for coming along with me. Bye. Oh no, my ring fell off. Almost. It's too cold. My rings are falling off.